Powerful and provocative. Prophetic and practical. Informative and inspirational. How you gonna do better if you don't know what better looks like? I do. Come on, let's talk about it with me, the mind massager. All right. What's up? What it do? It's time for another episode of the Intellectual Stew with yours truly, James Kirkland. And I am excited about another Tuesday edition of the Intellectual Stew. And you know, on Tuesday nights, I do something a little different. Monday nights, we usually deal with those relationships and whatnot. But on Tuesday nights, we try to deal with something a little different, spiritual, social justice, things of that nature. And I'll do things like rebounding from rock bottom or Tuesday flow. But tonight we're going to do our series called the Plot to Destroy the Black Family. The Plot to Destroy the Black Family. I've done a couple of episodes with my good friend, Carlos Tucker. But I have a special guest on tonight, and I'm going to bring him on the stage with me. And he and I are going to have a discussion centered around the plot to destroy the Black family. More specifically, we're going to try to talk about gentrification and its effect on society. But y'all know me. Y'all know that my conversations are 100% organic, and wherever we end up is where we end up. It should be something good regardless. So let's bring him to the stage, Professor Mr. Rashad Baadqir. How you doing, sir? Did I pronounce your last name right?
Baadqir. It's okay.
All right, Baadqir. I'm gonna get it right. I should have asked you that before we got on stage. That would have been smarter, huh?
No. We're all good, man. Appreciate it.
Okay, good. Listen, y'all, let me tell you, I met this brother a couple of weeks ago. My daughter was in a tournament, a national tournament for softball. For those girls that were in high school that probably could have played D2 college ball or gone to JUCO, but had real good academics, they decided to go to these sometimes the bigger schools and go. And they have these programs where they can play softball to continue to play. And they had a national tournament, a national championships. That's like the College World Series we're seeing now. They had one in Columbus, Georgia. And this brother Baadqir, he brought a team all the way from Sacramento, California. He came from Sacramento, California, and he is a professor at Sacramento State. And I'm going to tell you something, bro. I'm a little different because I was kind of raised around baseball, right? And so it wasn't really a whole lot of us. And it seems like when there are a few of us, we should gravitate to each other. But for whatever reason, in those settings, I found out that a lot of times, rather than gravitating to one another, we end up kind of pushing each other away, or we end up making a subliminal competition or something of that nature. I wasn't going to let that happen. When I saw you standing in that dugout by yourself, because I know you didn't have a lot of extra players on your team, I knew at some point I was going to have a conversation with you. And the first moment I got a chance to see you, I came over and we had a conversation. Is that not correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. Likewise too for me, brother. Yeah. Yeah. I saw you. I noticed you, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because on our team, my daughter was the only one.
And real recognized real. So you just kind of was going to do his thing. So I'm glad. Yeah, glad we got the hookup for sure.
Yeah, and you're going back to the '90s with that real recognized real thing. That's one of our that's one of our statements coming up. So when I met you, like I said, my heart poured out to you first of all because I know that y'all were getting beat pretty bad, but you didn't even. It was hot as I don't know what, and you only had just enough girls to play with because and we talked about that. And but you came and you competed. And I saw you networking. I saw you working. I mean, I saw you trying to introduce, make connections and all those things. And you even stayed a couple of days after or a day after and continued to support us and support the program. And man, and I appreciated you for that. But when we started to talk, I found out you were a professor, not just a coach. And I asked you, tell my listeners, if you will, hopefully they'll come in a little bit sooner in a few minutes. But these all are recorded. So people can go back and listen to them, and I will have it on audio only as well. But tell them, what do you teach there at Sacramento State?
I teach in the area of ethnic studies and Pan-African studies.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And when you told me the ethnic studies and the Pan-African studies, did you see my light bulb, my antenna go off that day? My antenna went off at that moment because I said at that moment, because I didn't even hesitate. I asked you immediately. I said, bro, I got to get you on my show. Didn't I say that?
Yeah.
And when you told me Pan-African studies and those things, then I thought that just fit perfectly with my platform and some of the social justice things that I would like to dive into, conversations I would like to have. And typically, I mean, I don't have a plan. I ain't gonna lie. You can see this is my notes right here. I don't really have any notes. So I mean, my conversations are super organic. Like when we talked earlier today, I'm checking you out with the conversations that we have. And the conversations that we've had thus far have been very substantive. We've been on the same page, and I think we're kind of looking for the same outcome, and that outcome is to enlighten our people of where we are, first of all, because so many of us are blind. We hear this whole saying now, where people say we're woke now, the woke community, and to say that you're woke gives implications that we've either been asleep, we've been in the dark, we've been out of the know. You know what I'm saying? But we've definitely been alienated to an extent, and now some people are awakening. What do you think about that?
Yeah, most definitely. Before I jump in that, just let me add, just for the listening audience, just sort of to expound on the type of classes I teach, because I think they might. There are people who are not familiar with what encompasses the classes that I teach and so forth. So in the area of ethnic studies, I teach Intro to Ethnic Studies, which is basically an introduction class, usually freshmen, first-year students. And it's just an introduction on the history of ethnic studies in terms of ethnography and in culture and race in the United States, and the impact race has as far as identity and stratification and so forth, like that. The other classes I teach with Ethnic America, which is a more upper division class. It's more writing intensive, so it's more case study based. In that area for upper division students. And then also I teach in Pan-African studies, I teach the Black family in the U.S., which is a class I just taught this past semester. I've taught African myths and religions, as well as what's the other one? African philosophy, yeah, so those are primary ones that I think about off the top of my head. It's a few of them, but it's catered to us understanding the history and, of course, the introduction of Pan-African studies. So that's another sort of intro class as well too, that I teach in that area.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I'm sorry. Go back to your question.
We were talking about the woke. The implications of being woke mean.
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of become a sort of cliche type thing that people are using. Anytime that, and especially within Black culture, I always kind of say, once it gets kind of mainstream, then it's kind of lost its bite, its punch. As Malcolm used to talk about how when things get integrated, when you start pouring milk into coffee and you start weakening it. And so, for many years, the ideal of consciousness, which was a term that sort of originated out of the 60s, this sort of Black consciousness or social consciousness movement, which sort of spawned this racial justice, anti-racism movements, the Black Panthers and so forth. And then from that, we've gotten to being on code and being woke now, which again is a new thing. So yeah, it's just one of these catchy things that people sort of have latched onto to think that they're really conscious and they're really woke to issues and things that's happening out in the world.
But because I'm be honest, I never even thought about it until I just said it to you a moment ago. The implications of the term woke, because it does suggest that there's a generation that has been sleeping. It does suggest that there's a generation that has been non-cognizant, if you will, of the goings on in the world. And you and I are going to get into that tonight, because there are so many systemic stratagems that have been put in place to tear us down, to keep us from growing, to put a glass ceiling in front of us, to make us think we can go so high, or even a closed in room to make us think that we can't go but so high. You know what I'm saying? Right. So with that being said, and it was interesting. Before I go into that, let me ask you a question. With all the classes that you teach, what is the demographic or makeup of your students in those classrooms? Is it mostly majority African American, or?
In my Pan-African Studies class, it depends on which class. The intro class, I would say that's majority Black, and then some of the other classes it could be split or majority non-Black. Really? Because like we have a small Black student population. We only about 5% Black population, about 30,000 students.
Oh wow!
So so we only have about but out of that,
1,500 students.
About 2,000 or something.
Okay.
Black students. So and then in my other classes, my ethnic studies classes, I would say those are split between white and Latino Hispanics.
And when you get into some of the truths, I mean, what are the responses like in those settings? I'm not sure how you're. I'm not sure you're talking about George. I'm not sure you're talking about the officer putting his knee on George Floyd's neck. But when you're teaching, what type? Yeah, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, there's always a small percentage, and I'm talking about maybe 2-3 students generally in the ethnic studies area who are just like, why I'm here, why I'm taking this class. They think that it's an indoctrination class and everything that they stereotype it to be, and then they soon find out that it's everything but that. It's a critical thinking class, if anything.
Talk about an oxymoron in indoctrination, huh?
Yeah, so that's
about indoctrination.
So
wow,
they get a rude awakening, but a lot of them still not of this small group. I'm saying that you get but surprisingly, most of them, if they it probably be, I'm sure it's a little bit more than that don't agree with what's being taught. But again, I bring receipts, I bring facts, let them argue with that. Let them argue with the history, not me, the personality, not my own interjection in what I say, and I always distinguish, with is my personal view versus what's my professional, scholarship on whatever topic I'm talking about, so they can differentiate and understand what I'm bringing is it has validity to it. It's credible. I'm not just bringing something, out the side of my mouth or something like that that they can really kind of attack on. And I encourage them to be critical, So and then I have my own methodology in which, like, kind of like the method to the madness type of thing, to keep them off balance on what I'm talking about, so that they'll be figuring out, is he really think this way, or is he just saying that just to say that? So yeah. But yeah, and then just kind of going back to the woke thing a bit here. Again, it starts with what is woke, and when do these folks sort of wake up to this wokeness? That's the thing. I say it's been put out there so much, but the ideal, you're talking about the impact of it, is this, the assumption is that people are woke or have arrived to this wokeness, but when did that actually happen? So
absolutely.
So, yeah, it's just quite interesting. Like I said, how it has just just sort of filtered itself in the mainstream of popular culture, and you get these folks who are sort of the talking heads out here, and of course they're only going to try to get likes and get and go and be in the go along, get along crowds, I like to say,
absolutely, with
everything. So yeah, they use it for whatever purposes.
And that's the only thing, man. And we're gonna get into this conversation a little deeper, but I really do admire the passion of this younger generation, right? And and them being woke, but I think they forget some of the shoulders that they had to stand on. You know what I'm saying? Right. Because you mentioned the 60s and the 70s, right? I mean, and you talk about a level of consciousness. The college students during that age, man, they were on a whole nother level when they were, trying to protest Vietnam, and you had people singing "I'm Black and I'm Proud," say it loud, and that gets into how strong our communities were back then, right? Yeah. I mean, even the gangs and whatnot, their purpose was to protect their community, to keep outside entities from coming into their communities, because there was such a sense of pride back then, right? Yeah. And so now that we've gotten into 2022, right? And go back to 1996 in Atlanta, 97 in Atlanta, 1998 after, even before then, during the Olympics time, right? They had this area called the empowerment zone, where you can go in and buy these depressed properties and get money, get loans on these properties and fix them up, and then they would raise the price of them and make the prices astronomical, where the people couldn't afford to live there, right? So this process of gentrification has been going on. It didn't just start. It's been going on, for the last 25 or 30 years, right? And it starts to make its way all around the country. But typically, those communities that have become gentrified were once thriving African-American communities. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, something too, in terms to, like I say, the consciousness of the students and everything. And like you said, the communities were much more locked in, and being really conscious. It was like, and I remember like being a college student in the 80s, and, you get checked. You couldn't just do this, that, and the other, and in some foul way, and think that that's not going to go unchecked. Somebody was right there doing that. And today's time is a little different. Certainly, the younger generation, I agree with you. I'm inspired with them, because there's a hunger. There's always going to be that kind of hunger with the youth, for truth, and they want to try to buck the system. They want to set their own path, like every young generation does, and they are, in the ideal of wokeness is understanding that how we've been bamboozled and hoodwinked, how why that's why we're seeing a lot of this shifting in the political sphere. We're seeing numbers of young blacks move out of the Democratic Party, for example. And this is frightening to the Democratic political establishment, because they know, like, this is the only single racial group that's 90+% loyal, like a plantation slave, to their voting bloc. And now that's getting disrupted, and they can't run their set of agendas. And so once we start looking at the ways and means other groups have sort of bitten on our struggles, which I look at as, blacks have been used as sort of the mule people, because we doing all the labor, doing all the hard work, and therefore other groups have come in and benefited off of those same efforts. I mean, there's no other group that's been in the forefront of anything that has been a beneficiary to blacks. So our struggle is a struggle that allows benefit for other groups more so than what other groups do to benefit us. See,
and that only takes place, and let's start the conversation right here. That only takes place when our people have become, because our people, I mean, not when our people, because our people have become so divided. And so when we look at the dividends of our division, and that's the thing, the division that exists for us were typically seeds that were planted by outside sources. And my reasoning for saying that is because, like, for instance, you got so many issues between black men and black women, right? But there's always so many misnomers. Like, for instance, black men don't take care of their kids. We all know that's not true, but they'll plant that seed in our society, and then people run with a lie. And all of a sudden, this lie is like a wildfire, and it's creating enmity between us as a people. And there's an old saying that said, a house divided can't stand, right? And because we're so divided, you brought up an interesting point. It's hard to, we had a conversation earlier today. It's hard to be united if you don't know who you are. And the thing that you said in Africa, explain that whole substructure in Africa, when everybody knows their identity because they know their tribe. What's the importance of that taking place in other countries and Eastern being type cultures?
Sure. Yeah. Well, again, they have the lineage. So they have that familial communal structure and understanding their lineage, their history, their identity, their nationality. And of course, our ancestors, for the most part, were stripped of that. Those were that were, as far as part up in the transatlantic slave trade, and even counting our indigenous heritage, those who have the indigenous heritage as well too. We were cut off and disconnected from our lineage, our names, our religions, and all those sorts of things, and created this new child. That's just like a saying that the African that got on the slave ship, was no longer the African when he got off the slave ship here in the Americas. Wow. So what they created was the American Negro, and in changing your mindset, changing that by design. And then when you look at the generational damage, or collateral damage of that, it is just disconnecting you from understanding who you are. And therefore, if you don't know who you are, then again, you're gonna look at us as a species. We're the only species that acts outside of our nature. Other than every other living creature knows its nature, knows what its role is, and understands how to maintain itself for survival. And when we've been certainly polluted with a lot of things that has disrupted that and distracted us away from understanding that and gotten away from it, and that's all been by design, as well.
Exactly. And I think, piggybacking what you're saying, is that because what that does is it makes our foundation fragile. And because our foundation is fragile, that we don't have enough substance to really stand on. That's when we acquiesce to other cultures. I've been using the expression here recently that the majority of what we as African, or a lot of, I ain't gonna say the majority. I don't like using the word majority because I'm only one person in this world of billions of people. But what I've discovered is that we are the products or the byproducts of
Mm-hmm.
culture clashes
Mm-hmm.
in our communities, right? Because, like you said, we in our DNA innately we are communal people.
Mm-hmm.
We are from a
Mm-hmm.
being
Yeah.
culture. We're not egalitarian at all. We're not
Right. Yeah.
separate. That's why
Mm-hmm.
we have family reunions.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's why we go to church, and
Mm-hmm.
they've always tried to copy us with that regard,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because Big Mama was Big Mama for a reason. I mean, that she represent the elder
Mm-hmm.
statesman in the tribe, right? And because and we all respected the elders, and
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't, and they got involved in our marriages, they got involved in
Right.
our disputes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't act outside. I saw somebody on Facebook the other day,
Right.
and they put this post out, right? Because they trying to figure out why do they still have to say yes ma'am to their mama.
Mm.
And after so long, mama, after
Right.
saying yes or yeah a couple of times, the mama said, hold on, wait a minute. Why? I'm not gonna let you keep disrespecting me. She's like,
Yeah.
well, mama, I'm grown now. I'm paying my own bills.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I have to? There was just a cultural thing, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, in that Eastern culture. But
Mm-hmm.
when we move from Eastern to egalitarian,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
am I saying when we move
Yeah.
to East and now this culture clash comes, now
Mm-hmm.
we want our hair straight when it used to be curly, right?
Yeah.
Now we want to make our lips look a certain
Right.
way. We want to look, modify our body to
Mm-hmm.
look like them.
Right.
And they in turn are turning around trying to look like us, right?
Exactly.
And
Yep.
and I think that is the direct
Mm-hmm.
result of a culture clash.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, kind of piggybacking back to the title of the show, the plot to destroy the Black family.
Absolutely.
Again, that's the seeding to which is the crust of what we have seen generationally for the last 500, 600 years since colonial times, and the way in which you want to control a people is you disrupt that. You cut off the foundation, which is the family, the parental unit, the mother and the father, the husband and the wife. You create that enemy within them. You disconnect them, and you devise these systems to whereby they will not flourish, and they will not certainly not flourish to the powers that be disadvantage. And so again, again, looking at the ways and means of the status of the Black male on the plantation, and creating this sort of mythology in him, this sexual beast on one hand, a savage, and all these sort of things, and programming them to have not self-worth of themselves, but less self-worth, and also self-hate of themselves. And that feeds into the image, the changing of one's image, and not liking oneself or loving oneself, certainly not knowing oneself, and in the history to that. So we just keep recycling the same things generationally over the years. And that's what we end up with today.
That's good, man. That's good. And it's ironic that you talk about the plantation aspect of it, because that's where it started. They
Right.
taught us that. I put a post on Facebook a couple weeks ago. I said Djangoism. I made up a word, but Djangoism is a direct result of being taught self-hate. Because if I hate myself, I hate everybody that looks just like me.
Exactly.
And so and like you said, on plantations, we were taught to do those things. I mean, we were made to fight each other for sport.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we were made to fight each other for sport.
Right.
And I think about growing up in North Little Rock, Arkansas. Back then I went to Old Main High School, and after every Friday night football game, I mean basketball game or football game, we met across. Well, I didn't, but they met across the street and just fought.
Yeah.
For
yeah.
just fighting.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I've always wondered, where does this mentality come?
Yeah. Sure.
Where I don't even really know you, but that's the way I settle my disputes.
Right.
Is by fighting. You know what I'm saying? Sure. But those seeds were planted so long ago in us, and they taught us how to hate everyone that looks like us, and it creates this division that I'm talking about. And if we're divided, we're not unified.
Exactly.
And when you think about it, we talk about
Yeah, and if you're not unified, you ain't gonna be able to get nothing done.
You can't get nothing done. And we talked about today about the Reconstruction, during the Reconstruction,
right?
That the black slave at that point, or freed slaves,
Mm-hmm.
were the only skilled laborers in the world, were in the country at that time. And because they were skilled laborers, then they were successful. Talk about that a little bit during that period, because you were telling me about that a little bit earlier today.
Certainly. When we, again, the devise of the giving advantages, from, again, I was mentioning prior to the ending of slavery, and then you had the head right system, which allowed white males to get benefits of land and property, and so they was able to set up, as opposed to creating these institutional policies, which didn't allow blacks, because for the most part of the, even though we start after slavery, the Reconstruction period, which was supposed to have been a system that had allowed segregation, blacks to live in certain areas and different things of that nature, but many of them couldn't, because they had nowhere to go, and therefore many of them were either attached or linked to the plantation, and in the term called sharecropping. So basically, which was like a new form of slavery for many of our ancestors, who were descendants of slaves. And then we get finally during the period of, from early into the period of industrialization, as industrial age started, as manufacturing and industry at the turn of the century, is created. Then new opportunities for blacks now to move out of the South, primarily because that's the largest concentration of blacks were in the slave states, former slave states, in the southern regions, and now opportunities to move north, move Midwest, and then of course move west eventually to places like California, Washington State, all the western states, and so forth. And through that, we were able to get the establishment of many of these successful, flourishing black towns, commonly known as like Black Wall Street, the most famous of one, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But there are other ones as well that either people don't know or they may have heard about sort of briefly. Places such as Durham, North Carolina, Rosewood, Florida, Allensworth, California, and
Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah. So
don't leave us out.
There's been many of these cities, but again, Black Wall Street was the most famous and the most one, particularly because of the history and what happened, on such a large scale in that story. And then from there, so we're, even if you talk about from the 30s to 40s into the 50s, there's still racial division, racial upheaval. We're still not dealing with racial equity and so forth. So the birth of the civil rights movement gets born in the mid to late 50s, and that carries over into the 60s, and where there's a lot of turmoil. And then again, we get the birth of the Black Power movement, which essentially is much more younger, much more radical, much more anti-establishment, anti-political structure, because it's like we just burned the house down. That's why the term comes, baby burn, because it was like, well, we're not benefiting anyway, so we ain't gonna benefit, then they not gonna benefit. And we start to see uprisings and so forth in our major cities as a result of that, which sort of fast track a lot of the change because of what was going on and the image of what was being shown around the world of American cities on fire. You see, because we haven't had that. And at this time now we're at a point where we got more mass media. You see, the media couldn't necessarily shield those type of stories, and the voices was getting out. And then we had leaders like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, who were traveling around the world and was putting America on blast about how they treat Black Americans. And so through that, and then obviously the powers that be are going to counter whatever any revolution does. They're going to have a counter move to that. So a part of that counter move, again, goes back to the family structure, goes back to the fact that we're going to disenfranchise your communities. We're going to infiltrate you with guns. You know, you had the Vietnam War and all these sort of things, where now you got an infiltration of drugs, guns, then eventually, like I say, shifting the dynamic of the empowerment of local community organizations, which are now become street gangs. And, you know, and then it just cycles itself much more. And then this is where we end up today. So that's a long history that goes into how the plot and plans have begun to devise our families, our communities, and to our own detriment.
Let's talk about that a little bit, the family aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
What, in by your estimation, because you just talked about the civil rights movement, how then going into the Black Power movement. During the civil rights movement, what did the Black family, Black community look like in by your estimation?
Sure. Well, I mean, again, we were still largely established in what's called the nuclear family. That means that you got a 2-parent home.
Okay.
Family. That's what I want to hear. You know, so we're talking about a high percentile of 75%, maybe 80% of Black households where you had 2 parents there.
Okay.
This began a shift through the war on poverty, and the class war, and all these sort of things, in ways in which we're talking about it. We're talking about whereby, first of all, you got to de-employ the Black male who's working, get him unemployed, because now when he's unemployed, you put him in a circumstance where he's going to be vulnerable, you see, because he's got to feed a family. And so then what you do through that, you entice criminality, you see. So in cities, particularly in city areas, urban areas, you play upon vices, drugs, drinking.
Hold on, but before you go there, let me ask you. Before you go there, let's and that's I get that, because we're going there, because that definitely. And I really didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, he's a professor, so if he slaps me on my hand with a ruler, he has a right to do so, because he's a teacher. But I'm trying to develop something here. So during the civil rights movement, you said that we had the nuclear family,
right?
So that meant there was mama, there was daddy. I mean, I don't know if we had the American dream, the 2.5 and all that kind of stuff. I know my grandmama had 13 kids. I mean, you know, so it was a little bit different. But in the community, we had this strong community, right? Because dad's home. And we know that statistically, children do a whole lot better when dad is at home. And back then, typically, mama didn't work outside the house. If she did, she worked part-time because she took care of the home, all those types of things, right? And so we had a strong family. And what strong family ended up in turn doing was producing a strong sense of community.
Yeah.
Because we were so, as you talked about a minute ago, we were united. We went to church together. We went to the ball game together. I mean, the Black Negro League for baseball was one. They were drawing more people than the major leagues were drawing at that time, right? Because we were a unified people, right? And so we had these strong communities. People cut their grass together. Kids played kickball, stickball, whatever they did. We had strong communities. And not only did we have a strong community, but we had a strong sense of community. But here it comes again. This culture clash, right? Now I'm getting me a little education now. I'm getting me a better job now. I can be a lawyer. I can be a doctor. I'm making money. I'm saving money. You know, I'm doing my granddaddy he wasn't educated at all. I think my dad says my granddad had sixth grade education. But he figured out how to drive a bus, to drive people back and forth to the cotton fields. He charged white folk to do different things, you know, but he made money all the time because he was crafty. Men in that time were strong and they were crafty. They were entrepreneurial by nature because they've always been one that were always involved, right? But then all of a sudden something happened that began to attack that substructure, that began to attack that foundation, because we would get married at a higher rate than anybody else during that time. Family was so important to us. But all of a sudden now, I think some of this, I mean, there were several things that happened that eventually led to this whole gentrification piece. But one of them was the Fair Housing Act of 1967, I believe it was. Is that the right year? So Fair Housing, I think that's right.
I don't want to quote somewhere around through there.
Let me look it up because I don't want to be wrong. But yeah, but when that came, that said that people could not discriminate, right, on where you can live. So that allowed us the Fair Housing Act of 1968. I'm sorry. So the Fair Housing Act of 1968. That's when they told us that we can live, that white people couldn't keep us from moving. And you said you grew up in California. How did you say? What were you telling me today, that there were certain celebrities that couldn't live in certain?
Oh yeah, in Los Angeles and in certain sections. Again, you know, the trajectory of Black access went from south and east to west and north. And so, you know, as the west side of Los Angeles was starting to develop, this is the side where the beaches are and stuff. And so, as they were able to move, but in this certain Black hub of sort of like what we call like the west side, it's not the west side to white folks, but it's the west side to Black people. It would be commonly probably be familiar with the Crenshaw area. You probably heard of Crenshaw in some popular community in Los Angeles. And so you have this area called Baldwin Hills, which again is a lot of affluent, well-established professional Blacks and entertainers and all that. And the surrounding areas there, you had entertainers who were not allowed because of the housing zones and all this racial restrictions, were not allowed to move. And these are entertainers that's on TV or in the mainstream of the culture, you know, well-established notoriety celebrities, but even they were certainly limited. Now, of course, they would allow one or two, like a Sammy Davis Jr. or, you know, people like that, you know, Sidney Poitier or somebody, you know, in those communities, but not too many.
Wow.
And so. So you had that was called, it was like Baldwin Hills was all Black Beverly Hills. You know, one of the nicknames of it was a Black Beverly Hills because of its such affluency, and it still ranks as one of the most in the top 10 of and actually like it's about the top 3 or 4 communities of wealthiest Black communities in the United States today. It's been one of the long-standing areas. Out of the top 10 wealthiest Black communities, majority Black communities, it's been a hold there. So yeah, we've been able to deal with those types of circumstances whereby, again, as you talk about with the way in which when we get to the processing of gentrification, it starts to really kick off in like the 80s. Because they get this era, you got the buppies, or the buppies were the reverse of what the yuppies were, and these were these young urban professionals. And so this is sort of the starting process is to where you got a lot of these young, successful, professional white people who can't afford to move in the areas that they are used to living in, and now they're starting to identify into areas. In sort of in the central city parts to buy property and develop and developers and so forth. And it started like a slow thing. And then the next thing you know, it's caught wildfire. And then from the 80s until the 90s. And then here we are in the 2000s. And so it crept up on us a lot. Like you talking about being woke. Well, we wasn't woke then. Because we were asleep and we were quick to our properties that we've had or inherited and so forth. And, a lot of families, you know, were quick to sell their properties or do these sort of reverse mortgage things that just sort of would take them out of having equity in their property to now, you know, less value than what it's worth. So they own more on the house than what it's worth. And they're kind of stuck in those situations like that. So So yeah, so that is all has contributed and played into the state where we are in dealing with the gentrification that has decimated a lot of our communities, for sure.
Well, let me ask you, why do you think? Why do you think people want to live where people don't want you to live? You know, I mean, if somebody's saying you that they
Right.
don't want me in your neighborhood, right? I mean, you know, because we were talking about
Right.
the young folk today. You and I were talking about how young people,
Mhm.
and honestly, man, I'm gonna tell you something.
Right.
You know, I grew up in Little Rock, North Little Rock,
Yeah.
Arkansas. I was the only black on my street, right? At the time, there's some blacks in the neighborhood, but I was the only black on my street. So there were several times that people go down the street and you call me the N word, riding down the street.
Right.
I've heard it several times. I've seen racial fights. I've seen all those types of things. But now when I got to high school, everything was pretty even. You know, we didn't have a whole lot of issues, right? But I was very aware of racism, right? But when I moved to Atlanta, in the car business initially, I mean, I experienced it. My first couple of weeks here, I mean, one guy talked to me so bad that I had to ask everybody else to leave the room and introduce them to who I was. Because I was raised with a daddy. You ain't gonna talk to me just any kind of way and think you're gonna get away with it. So I let him know at that particular point, I'm not the one to talk to like that. And I don't love anything in Atlanta except my fiance at the time. And there's nothing to stop me from coming across his desk on you. And I said it with a smile on my face. So now that was weird to me, that type of racism, right? But then when it was a long period where I got out of the car business. And you can live in Atlanta and not experience racism because you can be around people just like you. You can be around. You can go to all black schools. You can live in all black communities. You can go to all black churches. You can go to black grocery stores. You know, you can do all those types of things and never ever have to be around white people. Because black people in Atlanta, people in Atlanta said they ain't coming to Cobb County. I know old people to this day said they're not coming to Cobb County because they're not coming to Cobb County because white people in Cobb County, right? So there are so when you talk about young people, there's a certain segment that never really don't woke, if you will, or not experienced with racism. My son, one day I took him to baseball practice. He was the only black on his team, and we got in the car, and he said, "Daddy, why does such and such keep calling me Blackie?" I said, "Huh? Who call you what?" Such and such call me Blackie. Why does he keep calling me that? I said, "Oh, hell no." You know, I'm on the phone. This is the coach's son, right? So I done got on the phone with the coach and the organization, and I'm about to act a fool on this, bro. I'm ready to call the news station, everybody. You know, don't subject my child, because he didn't even know what it was. You feel what I'm saying? He had, now when he got older a little bit more, he started being around people. So what I'm saying is, if I don't really want to go nowhere, I'm not wanted. And you have, you remember the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? You had all these types of things where blacks were trying to go and be a part of a society that didn't want them. Why do we do that?
Well, part of that is, again, what I describe as a sort of a suffrage of the plantation mindset. And in the process is like when I my educating and lecturing my students, explaining like sort of the history of what racism and white supremacy is, which is a byproduct of cultural domination. And there's 4 key characteristics that I outline with that it produces. It's wealth, superiority, power, and privilege. And so one can have wealth but not understand the value of what wealth they do have. Like, for example, someone has land, and if they don't know, have an education, understand the value of what that land is, which is what starts the history when you're talking about land swindling, and someone else understands the value of what they're sitting on. There could be water under there, there could be oil, there could be whatever natural resource, gold, diamonds, or whatever. And if you are not familiar within that, then or have a knowledge of it, then someone else can swindle you out of it, tell you it's worthless. So the ideal of that is also a byproduct in this as well, when by you get people to, again, hate themselves, not to see what they have is a value. So therefore they're always going to look at everything white because this is what they have messaged you with, that everything white is better in your community or anything. So this is the same trick in the gentrification game. It is to get you to be convinced that your property isn't as worth anything, that it's going down, that all these sorts of things to get you to sell it at a lower price or give it up and so forth. And then they turn around and then they're going to profit because they know the real value of it.
Absolutely.
And so they got the scheme is set up so they can manipulate the value of it, and so forth. So, but they have you convinced that it is not. So with that, we have been for a long time now, been convinced and in our mindsets that, well, what we have isn't as worth anything. And then so here we got to go over here with somebody else. Now, if we understand our worth, our own value of what we have, then we will be less inclined to try to go with other people. Now, and then the other thing tied to this is the way in which we, as a people, as a group of folks, have to understand that it's others. We are the culture, you see.
Absolutely.
And what we produce is everyone else replicates. We don't have to go outside our own culture, just like we don't have to go outside our own community to thrive. You know, others come in our community and bite off our culture, bite off our expression and so forth, and utilize it for their own gains and benefits and so forth. And Absolutely. So, and if we don't understand that, then again, we're throwing away a lot of our own value, which we will miss. So yeah, so it comes into play within that, as far as how, why we so programmed to think that we have to go outside and different things like that outside our own communities. The thing with you know, like you know, I mean, I know there's still some areas around the country where there are, you know, strong Black hubs and so forth. Mm-hmm. But I mentioned about this fleecing of Black America. I mentioned that earlier in our conversation this morning, and what we see, particularly here in California, is that what I look at demographically is that we don't have a strong Black community anymore, like a residential community, you know.
Oh, wow.
Like that, because all of our communities now that were formerly Black dominated have become infiltrated by other groups, Latinos, Hispanics, whites, Asians, and every other group. So there's been a disintegration of the core Black community, which has impacted, along with the gentrification aspect, the value of the Black community in and of itself, and the impact of the Black community impacts the Black family, because again, you're not seeing one another, and then as we talked about, you know, you're not connecting to one another because you're just moving through and through spaces, and you're not able to line up and link and establish businesses and maintain businesses for your own self-vested interest, because this is what other groups are doing.
Absolutely.
See, they're not commodifying their community, their culture to others the way in which Blacks are doing within their culture, in their communities.
Wow. That's good. That's good. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about how Black communities are developed. You know, if in most Black, and you look at how cities are set up, like back in the day, a lot of Blacks used to live across the tracks, right? Because across the tracks was usually closer to the industrial areas, and the industrial areas is where most of us would live. Now, white people used to live in those areas.
Yeah.
Prior to World War I, World War II, in that area, they lived in those areas, right? And then when Black people decided to move in those areas, they didn't want to live around Black people. So we went through what you call white flight, where white people moved out of the industrial cities, all those types of areas, and moved to the suburbs. They went way in the outskirts and all these types of things, right? But now they got to drive into the city to go to work. And so after 20, 30 years of driving into the city, and they get tired of driving in the city, now they want to move back downtown. But guess what's happened? We've moved out of our communities and followed them to the suburbs, which weakened our communities, because the ones that could afford to move represented the leadership in the community. They represented the teachers, They represented the doctors. They represented the lawyers. They represented all the professional people. And so what they left was a generation of people on the inside who eventually became prey to our system. Because as you talked about earlier, the police began to police our people differently when it wasn't people in the area to protect themselves against policing, right? And then next thing you know, when privatized prisons start to arrive, when Jim Crow and the vagrancy laws and all of these types of things to find reasons to put black men in prison, right? And leave black and welfare systems and all of these types of things, right? They put all of these systems in place to weaken our communities. And then when white flight is ready to make a U-turn, guess what? Our community is so weak that people have lost their homes. Homes have become dilapidated. Bro, you got a generation of men that are in prison. I mean, daddy, uncle, brother, grandfather, everybody in prison. You got women now who are in charge, having to be single mothers to raise their children, whether in the projects or whatever. And now the community has become so decimated. Decimated. That's why you saw projects all across the country. People going in projects and moving people out like mass deportation. And you got boarded up windows all throughout these communities. And then a few years later, you go in there and they got condos. You go in there later, you got townhouses in the same area. And now you try to move back in that same area. You can't do it. Why? Taxes too high. So like you said earlier, not only did we gentrify the community, but we gentrified the people.
And, you know, kind of going back again, you know, again, it's all interconnected, you know, from the start of colonial slavery on down, you know, this is all interconnected in so many different ways. And so, but another key piece that came into play with the white flight was white response to Brown versus Board education, because this was the most critical thing. Because what education does, education is an equalizer, you know, towards access and resource to wealth building. So if you got an education class that's getting the same education, because you remember that before that, the education was separate and unequal. So blacks, you know, they were getting the reject books or the books that didn't have all the same information that the white kids were getting and the same kind of resource. Just like if you go to a certain school district, they're going to have more resources because they get more tax revenue and this and that and the other to have better schools in one area. So that was a part of that initial part of the white flight was the fact that these whites did not want their kids going to the same schools with the blacks now because of the Brown versus Board education and the creation of the suburbs. And then that just sort of fast tracked into the 60s once you start seeing all the stuff that's happening with the civil rights movements and all these sort of changing the laws and bills. But again, there was always a counter move to those things because they're not going to just allow these things just to change up what's the status quo and benefit for white privilege, which is why we talk about, again, privilege in that area with the wealth, superiority, and power. There you go. So the privilege part of that comes into that. So they're losing that. And now we got this term called white privilege now that they talk about. But that goes back way back. And so, yeah, they will, like, again, convince you that what you have isn't worth anything. So then they can come in and take it and do what they want to do it. And then here you try to get it and you can't because your liquid wealth, your net worth is less. And this is another key part of what we're seeing that's an impact of gentrification is the cumulative black wealth is declining, and it's going to be near zero across the board in the next coming decades, you see. So we're talking about like in the 2050s and so forth, you know, the average net worth wealth of a black family, typical black family, minus all the celebrity wealth, you know, because they always try to lump, that's like 2%. You know, we're talking about the average medium wealth it would be nothing, you know, when you look at what blacks are having. And so, and we see the cost of what's going on in the economy now with the inflation and everything. So your dollars, your money that you're making is shrinking anyhow, because you can't live. You can't afford goods and services like you used to. Or you changing adapting your lifestyle, especially if you got a family of 3-4 kids. So it's costing you more to live, and you're becoming a negative value asset based on what you're making versus what you're able to sustain your live. Now, one of the other things that again plays back and going back to the what I was mentioning earlier in terms of when blacks who were living in these established cities and so forth, these communities with a lot of these good jobs that were that in some of these areas, manufacturing and all this other stuff, and those jobs started to leave and close. The impact of that again played into the vices, because now when you impact unemployment, drugs, and then you start introducing these welfare policies that essentially was another sort of kicker to get the black male out the household, because again, the woman's got to get the welfare, and she got to get the welfare. She can't have a man in the house, and the man can't be in the house. So now that fractures the whole family unit right there. And this happened a lot with a lot of black families, deliberately, in the suffrage, which again expedited the fact of where we are today. You see, and then the impact, because now when you go from, like I said, up until the early 70s, it was still possible for there to be the father, the head of household, whoever, to carry the load. You know what I'm saying? One single income could still get you basically a house and and all that kind of stuff, up until about the early mid 70s. Then we started hitting that gas crisis and all that stuff, and inflation and different things started to trample that. And then the opportunities of women certainly increasing, and then that shifted, and then we started getting into the early 80s where we got more of the 2-parent working families, households, which increased the value of wealth for a lot of folks. But at the same time, so we've always kind of like going up 2 steps, but going back 3. There's been this fluctuation that's been an assault on the black family, black community, targeted from that period on, from the 60s, 70s into the 80s. And of course, dealing with the host of issues that went on in the 80s, just further exacerbate, which led to a lot of these young urban white professionals start moving back into these communities, which further impacted black resources, black wealth, further declining. You see, and all that wealth that was in core to these black communities is now being spread out. The arrogant of it, I mean, like how we look at the index has been now spread. So you don't get the same numbers, because you got blacks living out in white areas. So that's not counted in black wealth, because that's counted in white wealth.
Absolutely.
You're in a white area. You see?
Yeah. And that's the thing. Gentrification, it decimated our communities, but it also decimated us as a people. And that because our foundation became so fragile. And then we got and then the class. I think reverse racism is, I got on this shirt that says I can't be racist. And that's a whole nother topic we can talk about another. If you look at the back of the shirt, it says power. What is it? Power plus Power plus something equals racism. I forget what it is. It's on. I got it. It's on the back of. I can't see the back of my shirt, so
gotcha. Yeah, it's all right.
I can't see the back of my shirt, but I actually I need to know, so I want to say it. But with that being said, it definitely decimated us as a people. And power plus prejudice plus power equals racism. That's what I was saying. Sure. Prejudice plus power. Sure. But the reverse racism, because some of us made it, and when we thought we made it, then we kind of left others behind and think, and I hate that whole mentality. I got mine, you got to get yours type thing, because it's so diametrically opposed to the communal culture that we came from. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
but
definitely.
And so we're so divided, and so that's why gentrification worked. That's why they were able to come in and decimate our communities. Everybody revered Mr. Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton. They loved him, the first black president, they wanted to call him, but they don't want to give him the credit for what he did to our people. Because that crime bill, man, trying to show how tough he was.
Oh yeah,
man, he put a lot of black men in prison, man, a lot of black men for generations, for something that had a little cocaine in it, because they were so afraid. But like you said, like we said earlier today, crack was a problem, but crack wasn't a problem as long as it decimated our. Because what crack did to our communities, it left a lot of shells of buildings over there, right? I mean, buildings that never recovered, right? And so, some of those same buildings that didn't recover now are condos and apartment buildings and stuff, because people have gone in and renovated those buildings. But crack decimated our communities. But as soon as opioids got in their community, now we got an epidemic. Now we got a problem. But they putting people in prison for 10 years for something methadone could have fixed in 30 days. Because drug addicts needed treatment. They didn't need to be locked up. You know what I'm saying? And that's the difference. That with them, they opioids. I mean, Sally's son messed up. Little Peter's messed up. Let me go on and get Peter some help. Let's put him in a treatment center. Let's get him taken care of. All that kind of stuff. But when LaQuisha got strung out on cocaine or got strung out on crack, they wanted to put her into it. And like T.J. Walker just said. Biden, our current president, I don't get into politics, but I might do it a little bit tonight. I don't care. I can't. But he said Biden wrote the legislation for the bill that Clinton signed. And I remember Biden standing on the floor saying he didn't want his children going to school with those children. Didn't he say that?
Oh, yeah.
But he's going to stand up and talk about, if you ain't black, then if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Who the heck do you think you are, sir?
Yeah.
Who do you think you are? If you don't vote for me, well, you ain't black. And you listen to this man talk, it sound like paint's drying.
Yeah.
And people talking about the lesser of two evils. I ain't voting for now one of you evil. I'm sorry. I can't in good conscience vote for neither evil. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I'll run for president every year if that's the case. I promise you, long we got the ability to write in. Because I'm not writing in. I'm not saying nothing. I'm not voting anything, because they participated in the decimation. Now, I can have this same conversation, and we can talk about rebounding from rock bottom, or we can talk about show me how to date you, and we'll have 25, 30 people in the chat. But when we're talking about the mistakes we made, the things that we did to decimate our communities, then we can't get people to come on and talk about that.
Sure.
Because we think we got it together.
Exactly.
They think because we're living the American dream. I got a job. I got a house. I got some of us. I got 2.5 kids. Where your husband at, baby?
Yeah.
Because that was he was supposed to be in the equation too, right? But we by ourselves, right? We're doing all these things, and I've arrived now, and because I've arrived, I'm not worried about nobody else. But that pandemic showed how fragile we all are. And how close we all were to messing up, to losing everything.
See, this is a part of the whole cycle in the system, because as I was talking earlier, what the 80s created was the birth of the age of materialism. And so we got caught up in that because, again, you throw in the cocaine cowboys here, the crack cocaine here, the filtration of these covert wars that was happening globally, and the exploitation of all that, in Africa and everything else. And then when you tie into the fact that we began, like I was mentioning my own background, like consumers. And so we got into this consumption of materialism. And like you said, we think that we've arrived in our money. And the one thing we have to understand, again, going back to the economics of this, is black money is not equal to white money, because white money is the money that runs the ship. You see,
absolutely.
And so therefore you can take the richest black person in America, and their money is paltry compared to the richest white American money.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that power. That's why I give the emphasis of wealth and power being unequal, because you can have money, but that you don't have no power. Power don't need your money. No, you see, because you got plenty of people that got power, and they don't have a lot of wealth in terms of money wealth, but they got power. They got juice. They know how to make moves with stuff. And you got people who got money, and they think they can get, and it don't work that way. So those things are not one and the same.
They're not.
A lot of people confuse that because they think they got money that they gonna get, and it don't work that way. That's why you see these folks again, they run around here. Oh, I'm got this and that. Well, that don't mean nothing to these folks.
Man, let me tell you something.
You steal this, you steal that, and you're gonna get checked on that.
Bro, and I'm trying to tell them, man, because it's ways they've been creating wealth forever, man.
Right.
I'm gonna give you an example. I sell life insurance now, right? And I just got into doing the retirement products more so, and I'm learning about these index universal life policies, right? Now, you could take a 5-year-old child, right, and put a index universal life on the child, insurance on the child, and pay $75 a month until their child's 55 years old. After they don't make any more payments after 55, by the time they turn 70 years old, they'll have $1 million in the bank. They'll have access to $1 million through a life insurance policy, right? I got one of my friends. He asked me to run an illustration for him. I ran an illustration for him. He's 56 years old. Yeah. He said, James, I want to buy a policy about $300,000 whole life. Now, because he's 56, the insurance policy is a little high. So it's going to cost him $680 a month. But if he pays $680 a month for 15 years, he guarantees if he lives just to be 70, his family gets $300,000. If he lives to be 88, his family gets $480,000, right? So people, they've been doing this for years,
right?
Putting these index universal life insurance policies and things in place. Because you know what? With life insurance, it's non-taxable. It's tax-free. You can't tax it. You understand what I'm saying? Probate can't come get it, and you can borrow against it for the rest of your life and keep the cash value where it is. But those are thoughts that they think that bring generational wealth into their families. And we don't even want to buy a burial policy. We got to do a GoFundMe to bury somebody.
Yeah, which is a travesty.
It's a travesty.
There's a book I want to give you a reference for. I don't know if you do book reference. It hasn't come out yet, but I just been peeped to it recently by Howard French is the author.
Okay.
And it's called Born in Blackness, Africa and the Making of the Modern World.
Born in Blackness, Africa in the Make of the Modern World?
Africa and the Making of the Modern World. Okay. And the preview of the book is to highlight the exact decimation of Africa from the colonial period on, and how, Africa was once the center of the world, and it goes to pretty much from the start of the pre-colonial Africa, when Europe was trying to get, the ideal. We hear the story, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and all that, and he was, he got lost trying to go to Asia. Well, the author's take is that no, they were trying to get access into Africa, and through those means, because they was trying to get into the West Coast and Portugal and Spain, and it's trying to get more entry into, because you heard of a man named Mansa Musa, right? Mansa Musa was considered to be the most wealthiest man, when talking about wealth and this type of thing, in the history of the world, right? And so Mansa Musa, they had, he had the Mali Empire rolling, right? They had all of the integral resources, gold, salt, everything, And matter of fact, on his travels going, because he was a Muslim, he's going to Mecca. On his way in Egypt, he stopped there and he nearly collapsed the economy because he gave so much gold away over there, equivalent to like hundreds of millions of dollars, you see, in modern currency. And so, the thing is that again, going back to us understanding our wealth value, so that we can be wealth builders and create generational wealth for ourselves and our families. And that financial literacy, which we are remiss with, because like I said, our moms, grandpa, and all them folks, they didn't get access to have that for the most part. 90+% of us, families, we're just working folks and just doing this and all that. And not much is left, and then what is left oftentimes leads to a fraction of the family and fights and this and that and the other, because we haven't been educated on how to sustain the wealth, build on what we have without the bickering, because again, most of us has only just been getting by people, working class, just getting by folks. So even though we might look at, like, even the example of the policy and what gets inherited, it's not going to last long, because the tentacles of our not having any wealth, you're going to plunder. Just like when you see these folks that win the lottery and stuff, or like I was talking about with athletes, 90% of whatever these athletes, black athletes, they're going to be some sad story over here 5 years after they retire from ball, because their money is going to be dried up, and there's plenty of stories out there with a lot of these athletes who made millions of dollars and don't hardly have anything left. Yeah. So we've been again seduced into this materialism of trying to keep up with the Joneses and trying to show off your bling and your flash, and most wealthy people, they don't do that. They they wealthy. They got money just because they understand that the commodity of the value of building wealth, generational wealth, and maintaining that, and that gets ingrained, and we haven't had a consistent legacy of that in our families and our communities, in order that we understand lineage wealth, generational lineage wealth. So we will have sustained wealth. So, the circumstances of that, I've seen, families inherited money, but then it's gone just as quick as it came, because they don't have the discipline in understanding how to maintain and sustain.
Absolutely.
So you give this, just like we talk about reparations. Well, they already know they gonna give you that money, but they know you're gonna be spending what you're gonna be spending on, because they already got the profile.
Trues, Cadillac with trues and Vogues on him.
And what entices you, what your vices is. This is how this thing works when you're dealing with a power structure, and power doesn't give up anything easily, and so it's always going to have a counter strategy. So if they're going to give you this, then they taking something away from you over here. It's always going to keep his advantage, and so forth. And it's just like a chess game. It's this is what life is like, making moves and counter moves.
That's it. That's good, man. That's real good. It's 10:19 out here. I know y'all way out there in California, so it's only 7:19 out there. Yeah. So we're gonna start winding. We're gonna start winding this conversation. Y'all still got light. It's dark out here for real. I'm watching the baseball game. We playing against Oakland tonight, so I'm watching that game tonight. We beating y'all too. How far is Oakland from? That's a long way from Sacramento, isn't it?
Yeah, about an hour and a half at most.
That's all.
Hour and 20 minutes or something. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know it. Okay, I didn't realize it was that close. Yeah. All right, but listen, let's I've enjoyed this conversation so far, and I think this is the TJ. We're gonna get you on here too soon. TJ Walker, that's a friend of mine. He's very into these types of conversations, so we got to get him involved as well. So, but talking about this whole gentrification piece, and most of it is a result of the programming that we've been susceptible to. We've been programmed to. We've been programmed, and we've been sold a bill of goods, and we bought it hook, line, and sinker. Some people are waking up now; they think they're woke, but I don't think anybody has a definitive plan. But I think a plan has to be put in place to start the process of deprogramming, or the whole waking up thing, as you just said. So I mean, how do we? And we got 10 minutes, about 10 more minutes left, so we're gonna talk for 5 more, 6 more. How do we begin the process of starting to deprogram? You as an educator, you as understanding the history and the foundation of what Pan-African. Because you talked about it earlier today. You said we were close with the Negro Improvement movement and what the Muslims were able to do. But what by your estimation, what do we do, or how do we start the process of deprogramming and reversing what the effects of gentrification?
Again, it all centers back to education and community networking and the ideal of understanding our value and our power of economics. And again, the mindset being that we have to go from consumers to producers and wealth builders. And so because everything is strongly connected with both education and economics. And so what we're spending on, how we recycle our dollars is a big part of that. In our communities and the communities that we do have and able to continue to have, because this is again the model that other communities do. They thrive upon that, and we are less of that. So, but that's the most critical thing we have to get in order to start this process of being deprogrammed and countering what's happening in the way in which we have this gentrification. Now, and real quick, I want to bring something up just to kind of highlight the impact of how that works. I'm sure you're familiar with Brother Tariq Nasheed. Urban. Well, he has started a project. He did a fundraiser last year whereby he's trying to do this hidden history museum in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to give you an example, not so much about him per se, but just in the example of how when we're trying to establish things, how we have to understand in code strategy that there's always, again, counter moves to what we're trying to do to be progressive. So the ideal is that he's trying to start this true history museum that tells our story, not that's manipulated by other people. That we want to tell our truth, our story by us, for us, and not other people. Because most of these other museums, they controlled by white folks, and they're trying to tell you what what your history is as told by them. Because he who has the pen writes the narrative, right? So,
that's right.
So the point being is that, so he put it out there, hey, I'm trying to get this property in this particular area. And so obviously those who are going to be counter to that, they're going to make moves to block it. You see? So the point being, sometimes in a strategy point, even though we want to put it out in our community, some things we got to keep behind the scenes, because
yes, sir, that's good.
Put out public, now the enemy knows what your plan is, and they're gonna put in infiltrators and interlopers to disrupt.
They did.
So what has happened is the property he was trying to acquire, now the buyers didn't want to sell, or they raised the price up to again put a block to what he's trying to do constructively. And this is just one little incident, but this replicated it across the country when we make these public attentions about what we're trying to do. And the point being, so in other words, what I'm saying, by a strategy methodology, oftentimes we got to keep it in house and keep it behind closed door and what we're trying to do. Because once we oftentimes use this public space can be used against us at the same time, even though it's enlightening others. So there's a strategy that has to be well thought of within that. You know, we got to, again, go back to using like slave code word language, tut language,
hear nobody
so
pray,
they don't know what we're doing, you see.
Absolutely. That's good. That's good. So we got to, but keep it all.
You broke up on me.
My internet is tripping on me.
Okay.
Some, I don't know, my Wi-Fi is going out. Off. But we've had a good conversation. Are you there still? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
You're breaking up on me now.
Okay. Are we back?
Yeah, you keep breaking up. Yeah. I catch you for a second, then it breaks up.
All right, cool. So we're gonna go ahead and start and break it on.
Yeah,
I always end.
I catch about a word or two, and that's it, and it keeps breaking up.
Yeah. So I end all of my conversations the same. I always say that the world is changing. My question for you is, why do you remain the same? Y'all have a good night, and we'll talk again soon.